What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, December 12th, 2018, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to powwow on a Friday, and another weekend of whatever insanity is going to be happening. And there does seem to be a lot of that going on now. We have a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. So let's get right on into it. Turning over to France here, the Yellow Vests movement continues to grow. It's now seen basically as an uprising against the neoliberal King Macron, and that gasoline tax was simply the last straw in a long series of measures that clearly favored the rich at the expense of the majority of the population. And that is why the movement achieved almost instant popularity and support. And now their list of demands are expanding. The Yellow Vests are calling for a Frexit. They want France out of the EU. Higher wages, lower taxes, easier university requirements, better pensions. They want Macron himself to resign. And the Yellow Vest protests are spreading. Right now, they have a 70% approval from the citizens of France. And at this point, it's worth going back to that old quote by JFK: when peaceful revolution becomes impossible, violent revolution becomes inevitable. And that seems to be the point that we're seeing in France, also the Netherlands, Belgium. These things are starting to pop up all over the place. It reminds me of that line from Young Frankenstein, when the villagers have the torches and everything, and they're getting ready to go on a rampage, and the chief of police comes on out and he says, "A riot is an ugly thing, and it's just about time that we had one." So that's kind of where we are. Apparently, the Yellow Vest protests have spread to the farmers, and there's an interesting Twitter animation of farmers slinging horse poo at the cops. So, good for them. What can I tell you here? So a lot of people now are looking at that shooting that took place at the Christmas market and saying, oh, come on now, the timing is just too cute. And everybody is suspicious. The shooting takes the focus of attention away from the grievances of the people, the Yellow Vests. It takes the focus of attention away from Macron and what he's been mismanaging the country. It allows Macron to restrict public gatherings in that part of France. And, of course, it plays the identity politics cards, which benefits the rulers. So who benefits from this shooting? And apparently, so many people have come to this conclusion that the corporate media felt compelled to respond. Over at the Daily Mail, they're talking about well played Macron. Conspiracy theorists make incredible accusation that French government orchestrated Strasbourg shooting to distract from the Yellow Vest protests. And if you go through this whole article, they're just, it's just what an extraordinary, just try to ridicule the whole thing. There's nothing incredible about it at all. Governments will stage events to distract the media, like when Clinton hauled off and launched cruise missiles into Sudan and other countries, when Monica Lewinsky was coming out of her testimony. Remember when the Marine barracks in Beirut got bombed? It was a huge embarrassment. 24 hours later, they invaded Grenada. Governments do this kind of thing all the time. There's nothing incredible about this. And it really is very suspicious, okay? Because this suspect, who, by the way, is still at large, he got away, Sheriff Shekat, who shouted Allah Akbar or Aloha Snackbar or something, and opened fire on the crowds, was known to security services. was known to be part of Islamist networks in Strasbourg. He had a lengthy criminal record, which included 27 convictions and lengthy prison sentences in Germany, France, and Switzerland. It's a lot of work for a 29-year-old guy here. And the French Secret Service had been warned that this guy became radicalized in prison, and they put him on a designated threat to the state watch list. But he just waltzed on into the Christmas market. And, of course, they raided his home. They found he had all kinds of guns and even grenades. And they missed this one. Or they went to this guy and said, we need a convenient terrorist. If you'll go do this for us, we'll sneak out of the country. We'll send you off somewhere to the South Seas with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. But the timing just was too cute. There's no getting away from it. Everybody is suspicious of this. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. So what exactly is going on in France? Well, it's clearly a populist uprising. And what makes a populist uprising dangerous for the government is people aren't playing by the rules. They're not aligning with one of the pre-designated parties that are kept constantly quarreling with each other. Basically, populism is a revolt of the people against the political elite as a whole. And they don't care if there's a distinction whether it's left or right wing. It's a systemic problem what's going on there in France. So, anyway, meanwhile, as you know, Macron's attempt to buy off the yellow vests with instant budget handouts basically threatens to blast through the Eurozone's fiscal limits. And that would damage his credibility as the champion of the European project and the guardian of French public accounts. Basically, all of these short-term measures he announced in this theatrical mea culpa on Monday leaves Macron's putative grand bargain with Germany in tatters. It's going to blow the French budget because they have too many obligations. You know, governments, they get money, they spend it immediately. It's not like they had it in the savings account that they, could dip into to pay for all of these things. Apparently, the French pay a 380% tax on gasoline already. And that was before the carbon tax to fight human-caused global warming. So, anyway, over at Time Magazine, they've announced their Person of the Year. It's Jamal Khashoggi, the assassinated Washington Post journalist. And already I'm seeing all kinds of snide little posts about, he's another crisis actor and we're tired of looking at him, which I imagine is probably being tweeted from some of the other people who were on that nominee list that are feeling left out, that they wanted to be Person of the Year. Well, sure, you're in good company, like Hitler and Stalin and Al Gore. Turning on over to the Huawei situation, the CFO, Meng Wanzhou, has been granted bail. They posted the bond. She has to submit to 24/7 surveillance with an electronic ankle monitor while she awaits extradition hearings. Now, Meng's next court date has been set for February 6th. Now, here's where the story gets a little interesting, and Fox News was just reporting on this a few minutes ago. Donald Trump has said he would consider intervening in the case of Meng Wanzhou and setting her free as part of a broader trade deal to ease rising tensions with China amid national security concerns. So, in one context, this makes the arrest of Meng as a plain old-fashioned kidnapping and extortion for ransom. In another context, Trump needs to be very, very careful because this puts him on the edge of what could be considered an impeachable offense of obstruction of justice. Now, the U.S. is concerned about these Huawei phones being used for espionage and spying. And the reason they're suspicious is because the U.S. has been doing it all along. we're always seeing the U.S. government trying to weaken encryption or bypass encryption. They want the right to peek in at everybody else, but they don't want any other companies or countries to be able to do it. You know, it's all, you know, American exceptionalism. We can do it, you can't. As you may or may not know, encryption technology is under heavy control here in the United States. The publication of encryption studies, research, is subject to pre-publication censorship by the U.S. government. Years ago, there was a big stink when cell phones started to be encrypted so that people with scanners couldn't eavesdrop on your conversations. The first cell phones came out with a 16-bit encryption key. And then it was revealed that the high order 816-bit, but it was really only 8-bit, which made brute force cracking of the code very easy with portable electronic devices that the police and nefarious agencies could use here. And apparently when Lotus Notes wanted to sell their products abroad, the NSA leaned on it to weaken their encryption, to go from a 64-bit key to a 32-bit key. Back then, they thought a 64-bit key was virtually unbreakable, but the technology has advanced. Meanwhile, there's this counter arrest, if you will. Canadian citizen Michael Kovrig from the International Crisis Group was detained by China's state security officials in Beijing. And apparently, China is saying that if Michael Kovrig was performing relevant activities for the group in China without being listed, he was in violation of China's foreign NGO law. Now, the U.S. Program Director of the Crisis Group, Stephen Pomper, has called for the immediate release of the company's senior advisor. I don't think China's going to respond to that. What are we going to have, a prisoner swap? You know, Meng for this other guy? It's amazing here. All righty, let's go into the war zones. There are so many of them. By the way, we are waiting for the announcement on Theresa May's vote of no confidence. Apparently, you know, they had the vote earlier today, and then they counted it, and then they were going to announce it, and apparently Theresa May is getting ready to speak, so maybe she won. I'll have to look at that the next commercial break. Anyway, over in Syria, Russia and the Syrian forces have done a good job. They have now retaken 96.5% of Syria. Apparently, 1,411 residential areas have been liberated from ISIS since the start of the Russian military operation in Syria. And this is according to the head of the Russian National Defense Management Center, Colonel General Mikhail Mizentsi, during a joint meeting of the Interdepartmental Coordination of the Russian and Syrian headquarters for the return of refugees. So, they really have all but one there, but the U.S. doesn't want to give up. They don't want to leave. They want Syria as a launching platform for more wars. They don't want to admit they lost, is really what it comes down to. So, the Kremlin has announced they are willing to release all U.S. and Russia communications regarding the election meddling charge if Trump will agree to it. And they're basically saying it's time for Washington, if they really seriously think this happened, they have to start cooperating. And Russia says there has never really been cooperation. Washington's cooperation in probing the DNC hacking attacks was limited. And Moscow only received a number of messages containing technical information about the hack. Russian cybersecurity experts examined it even before the inauguration and said an exhaustive response was sent to the American side. But the U.S. never came on back from that. Now Now, we had a caller about this yesterday where Mike Pompeo has basically went off ragging on Russia for sending 2 nuclear-capable bombers to Venezuela, and was out there saying, you know, what a waste to fly these planes 6,000 miles, and you know, you're just squandering public funds and squelching liberty and freedom while the people suffer. He's laying it on with a trowel there. Well, the Kremlin says the flights are training exercises and part of Russia's right to make regular flights over international waters, which is absolutely correct. He went on to say Pompeo's statement is utterly inappropriate comment, very undiplomatic. And Peskov also mocked Pompeo's reference to squandering public funds by taking note of the United States maintaining by far the world's largest military budget, noting that just half of the U.S. military budget would be enough to support all of Africa. And as the caller mentioned yesterday, the U.S. is flying all over the place. You know, we've been hearing the military aviation out this window here all morning. They're out there turning and burning. You get to pay for it here. Now, I predicted that this was going to happen when Trump reversed Obama's normalization of relations with Cuba, which was one of the few things Obama did I agreed with. Apparently, Moscow is gearing up to establish a long-term military presence in Latin America. And apparently the current mission of those 2 bombers to Venezuela is part of the plan. So Russia is now starting to basically play the U.S. game back against itself. Russia says it is the right idea to include Venezuela in long-range aviation missions. And in point of fact, Russian and Venezuelan pilots are already conducting training flights with these aircraft. Okay. Story coming on out from Global Research, California. The Trump regime is clearly arming and training Ukrainian forces for war. The latest forecast is it'll start on December 14th. And the question is being asked, should Donbass join Russia? And basically, a state of war initiated by Ukraine exists between the U.S.-installed puppet regime and the Donbass freedom fighters, who are trying to break away from Kiev because they want democratic governance. They want to break free the way Crimea did. So if this U.S.-orchestrated war continues, Washington and Kiev willfully undermined Minsk I and II conflict resolution, clearly indicating they want war, not peace, right on Russia's border. Trump has nominated U.S. Army General Mark Milley for chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This is a guy who previously said Russia is the #1 threat to the United States. Now, he's seen actual combat. That's a good thing. But he's had a lot of deployments around the world. But basically, he's out there saying Russia is the #1 threat. Okay. Now, here's an interesting development, and I'm really curious as how they pulled it off, knowing how difficult the concept is. Apparently, Russia is getting ready to track future U.S. missiles with an upgraded over-the-horizon radar. And they call it container. And these are over-the-horizon radar stations along all of the Russian borders, which means that military assets that are coming in, like hypersonic, will be detected much more quickly. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. I'm going to check in on Theresa May's no confidence vote. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And yes, Theresa May is still Prime Minister of Great Britain. She survived the no confidence vote. And so she's getting ready to make a victory speech here. I don't think she's out of the woods. There's still calls for her to simply resign. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later, about some of the things she's promised to do, which whether she'll keep those promises or not, who really knows, because after all, she's a politician. Okay, now, getting on back here. Apparently, Russia is getting ready to deploy these over-the-horizon radar stations along their borders in order to be able to detect incoming threats from much further out. It's a very smart thing to do, because in the event of a shooting war, those satellites that are up there to detect launches, those are going to be the first things to go. That'll be the opening salvo in World War III for real, is war in low Earth orbit to get those satellites killed. And so we'll be back to a two-dimensional map, if you will. And obviously radar is going to work. Here's the problem. How do they get it to work? Because I know a little bit about radar, and I know there have been efforts to create over-the-horizon radars here in the United States that have not worked out all that well. So this may indicate that once again, Russia's electronic warfare is way ahead of ours here. Getting on down to Israel, sometimes you have to wonder if they really intentionally want to annoy people. Apparently, chair of the Defense Committee of the Israeli Parliament, Avi Dichter, has called for the killing of all the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And he was responding to the peaceful protests of the Great March of Return, and he came on out and he said the Israeli army has enough bullets for every Palestinian. And basically said, they're all just Nazis anyhow. You're projecting, Avi. You're projecting. Netanyahu was out there, I guess, early campaigning. You know, hating the Palestinians is good politics in Israel. He's out there saying that no settler will be uprooted while he's prime minister. And went on to say, our enemies want to uproot us from here, but as long as I'm the prime minister of Israel, not a single Jew will be uprooted from his home. And then he went on to pledge to build more and more settlements and settlement units, all of which, of course, are illegal under international law. So, and apparently Israel is planning on building West Bank settlements despite the pressure coming in from the International Criminal Court, you know, which is trying to remind Israel what they're doing is illegal under international law. And Netanyahu is standing up there and saying, we are above international law. You think you're going to come down here to Israel and throw the handcuffs on me? I don't think so. Just openly defiant. Israel's a rogue nation here. Israeli Minister Ophir Akunis toured the Israeli settlements, declared his support for the annexation of the so-called Gush Etzion settlement bloc and Judea and Samaria, the West Bank in general, saying, we are here to win. I think they're getting ready to annex the West Bank. There's a story coming out of Al Jazeera. Apparently, there is a growing awareness and a concern that Israel's undercover forces are impersonating Gaza aid workers to go into the Gaza Strip and carry out assassinations of Hamas. And apparently, last November, Hamas published photos of individuals it said were involved. Images that Israel's military censor immediately subjected to a publication ban. So go ahead, act like you're guilty already. Israel forces storm a Palestinian town and confiscate the closed-circuit TV footage. Apparently, 40 armored military vehicles stormed the occupied West Bank cities of Ramallah and al-Birah, raiding a number of shops around the headquarters of the Palestinian Financial Ministry and confiscating the closed-circuit TV footage from the area. Apparently, in the process, they stormed the financial ministry itself. So what had happened at that finance ministry that Israel doesn't want to get on out? Because that's a major, major effort to go on in there with all those armored vehicles and just say, we're going to take all the TV cameras. We're just going to grab those. All right, we're going to take another commercial break. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about incidents going on down in Israel and Palestine. And apparently another group of Israeli Jewish settlers stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque and performed religious rituals in its courtyards. Now that, of course, is intended to provoke. And they were, of course, protected by Israeli occupation forces. And now they're starting to call for the demolishment of Al-Aqsa. Another group of settlers organized a night demonstration in Jerusalem's Old City to mark the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. And they chanted anti-Muslim and anti-Palestinian slogans. Again, called for the demolition of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and for more settlers to be allowed into Islam's third holiest site. Well, I'm sure that probably will happen as soon as Muslims are allowed to go into the synagogues. Israel has announced they're going to build an embassy complex in occupied Jerusalem. This is roughly a year after Donald Trump announced his plans to relocate the American embassy to the city. And the complex is going to be built on a 25-acre plot of land in East Talpiot, establishing an illegal settlement there in 1973. The plan to build the complex in East Talpiot is therefore in contravention of international law, as if Israel ever cared about international law. Any country that chooses to move its embassy into that complex upon its completion would also be in violation of international law. Now, here, I think, is a very revealing story. As you know, Israel, which is flush with all kinds of money Congress takes from you and gives to them, spends a lot of that money coming to the United States to basically invite various people for a all expenses paid trip to Israel for indoctrination. And they've been doing it with a lot of police departments, although that is starting to end as the police departments realize the optics are bad on that. But apparently among young American Jews, there's been a decline in the number of people who accept these trips. It's a major, major downturn. Since its establishment in 1999, the Birthright Organization has brought about 500,000 young Jews from around the world on free trips to Israel. But it's starting to fall off. And basically, this seems to reflect the well-documented fact that young American Jews are growing increasingly disengaged from Israel. They have less and less interest in visiting the country, even when the trips are free. Well, it may be less a lack of interest and more a desire to not be identified with Israel when you consider how Israel's behaving. Israel's brand is very bad right now. And maybe they just want to I'm just going to live my life. Israel can do what Israel wants to do. I'm going to live my life here. Apparently, an Israeli military delegation is going to Moscow for consultations, and their agenda is going to be to proclaim that Israel has a right and an obligation to oppose the presence of Iranian forces and Hezbollah in Syria. This was announced by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In point of fact, no. Israel does not have a right to oppose anybody inside Syria if Syria's government doesn't give them permission to come on in. The instant Israel crosses that Syrian border, it's an act of war against Syria. The belligerence is definitely going up, alarmingly so. I'm very concerned about the Christmas New Year holiday, that something might be done to try and say, oh, feel sorry for Israel, feel sorry for Israel. And by the way, on the cable channels going around the cable box last night, Hitler, Third Reich, you know, the missing Nazi gold train treasured things all over the place. Every time corporate media loads us up with the Nazi stuff, Israel's getting ready to do something icky here. Now, Jewish Voice for Peace has targeted CNN over the firing of Dr. Mark Lamont Hill for having defended Palestinian rights. And apparently they took out this ad in the Sunday edition of the Atlantic Journal-Constitution that reaches almost 1 million people. And the ad, of course, was chastising the network. Now, this is the paper of record in CNN's hometown. And this was a powerful message in support of Professor Hill and in protest of his firing. Now, if you remember, CNN fired Hill after he spoke not at CNN, but at the United Nations in defense of Palestinian rights as part of the UN-organized International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. Perfect venue, right on topic. And apparently some pro-Israel supporters got really upset and called up CNN and said, you fire this guy. And CNN said, yes, massa, I will fire. Yes, he's gone. He's gone out here. That'll teach him. Well, maybe, maybe not. It's not like he spent all that much time at CNN. It was just an occasional thing. His main job, of course, is as a teacher. And as you know, that along with attacking, or rather pressuring CNN to fire him, Israel supporters were putting pressure on Temple University in Philadelphia, where Lamont Hill is professor of media studies. And they said, you fire him, you fire him. And Temple University, to their credit, said, no, we are not going to fire him. And so this was a major setback and a blow to the pro-Israel's lobby's efforts to weaponize anti-Semitism, to basically turn it into something to destroy people's lives with for daring to speak out against Israel. Interesting comment from Information Clearinghouse pointing out the movement to suppress and impoverish critics of Israel is at its heart racist. And they go down the list of all these academics: Mark Lamont Hill, Tim Anderson, Stephen Salaida, Rabab Abdelhadi, Haram Bazian, Alam Matasib, Norman Finkelstein, other academics have all been targets of the movement to silence criticism of Israel or defense of Palestinians. And this involves like threats, legal actions, trying to deny them employment, violating their free speech rights. In fact, Salaida and Finkelstein were in fact denied employment to the great detriment of their entire career. Hill and Anderson are currently defending themselves from this threat. Now, these accusers are invariably Zionist, pro-Zionist individuals and institutions. Their backers include the Israeli government, which coordinates the movement through its Ministry of Strategic Affairs, the Israel lobby in the US, UK, France, Australia, and other countries, and the major Jewish Zionist billionaire funders such as Sheldon Adelson, Chaim Saban, Bernard Marcus, and others. It's terror tactics. It's brown shirt stuff. Okay, we have a caller on the line. James in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to ask you about that comment you made earlier about crisis actors and regarding Khashoggi.
Yeah.
Can you expand a little bit on that?
No, I just said I received an email that was basically, ragging on Khashoggi and calling him a crisis actor and saying we don't want to see this guy anymore, which sounds to me like somebody who wanted to be Times Person of the Year is feeling the sour grapes.
Oh, really? Well, I coincidentally posted something on your site today, or yesterday or so, calling the guy a crisis actor. And I really do believe it's a 100% hoax. Everybody that's behind this story is the same people that are behind the Russian collusion hoax. Michael Isikoff and CNN people and Washington Post. And I remember you saying that your thought, the evidence that it was true, was that the wife said that he was missing. Well, it turns out he has 5 wives. And this one just kind of popped up 6 months ago.
Well, again, here's the whole thing. When this first happened, I wondered if this was some kind of an operation to pressure Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman out of power, because there's a little bit of a palace coup underway. A lot of people do not like him. But right now, Donald Trump continues to have his back. And I think because Khashoggi was a writer for the Washington Post, may have biased Times opinion on that. Anyway, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And getting on back to the news here. Here's a very interesting little article. This came out of Blacklisted News. And it's a very thoughtful, careful analysis of the U.S. approach to Iran for the last 40 years. And the constant threats of war, all options on the table, the U.S. Instigating instability inside Iran. Remember, they tried to have another color revolution back in 2009. And the article basically goes back and says what this is all about is that from 1953, when the CIA kicked out Iran's legitimate government under Mohammad Mossadegh, until 1979, when there was the Iranian Revolution, the United States had a great deal in Iran. They were getting cheap oil, so was Great Britain. Iran was buying all kinds of weapons from the United States, from General Dynamics, Lockheed, Northrop. He was also part of Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program. And in fact, I've got a scan of a full-page ad saying, look who's now in favor of nuclear power, which was being put on out there because the American public was still not really sure that nuclear power was going to be safe, and there was this propaganda campaign. Well, then in 1979, of course, there was the Iranian Revolution and the Shah was kicked out. And it came as a shock to the American people because the corporate media, even back then, was propagandizing us that the Shah of Iran was loved by the people of Iran, that he was popular. And with that went Iran as a weapons customer, and Iran's oil went back up to the fair market value. And the U.S. is basically throwing a tantrum. And whatever agenda other countries like Israel may have, what the U.S. effectively wants to do is drag Iran back to being under a new Shah. And I understand the son of the Shah of Iran is still out there somewhere, dreaming of the day that he can sit on the peacock throne. Anyway, over in Great Britain, General Sir Nick Carter has warned that the Great Britain must prepare for all-out war against Russia, China, and Iran. I hope he doesn't mean all at the same time. But he was out there saying that Russia, China, Iran, and sadistic terrorist organizations like ISIS are a colossal threat toward the United Kingdom. And he said Britain's security, stability, and prosperity are being challenged by the ambitious superstates. This from the former seat of the British Empire on which the sun never sat, I would like to point out. And Basically, in his first lecture as chief of the defense staff at the Royal United Services Institute, Russia and China had studied our strength and invested carefully in new methods and capabilities designed to exploit weaknesses. Well, yeah, that's what you do. If you are seriously thinking that you're going to have to go up against somebody, you look at what they've got. Go back to Sun Tzu, The Art of War. You attack your enemy where they're the weakest. And this guy is acting like, how dastardly. They're looking for our weaknesses to exploit them. That's how wars get fought. I would have thought the British would have learned that back in 1776 when they kept insisting on marching line-ahead formations into the American militia who were hiding behind rocks and trees and shooting. That was Britain's downfall. They had modern firearms, but they still organized their armies on the model going all the way back to ancient Rome. Over in Yemen, along with all the other problems they're dealing with, cholera, war from the Saudis, extreme poverty, apparently suicide rates are soaring because they are so poor, they're killing themselves before the hunger does. Yemen is an absolute tragedy. It is a stain on the reputation not just of Saudi Arabia, but of the United States that enables this. Okay, over in the South China Sea, a senior Chinese military official, Dai Xu, has threatened the U.S. Navy vessels, recommending that China should attack the ships. Meanwhile, the U.S. Air Force ran their annual Joint Forcible Entry Drill in the night skies over the U.S. on Sunday, one day after the comments. I wonder what all those migrant hordes down there on the ground were thinking when all those planes flew overhead. The U.S. has thrown more sanctions on North Korea based on human rights, while Donald Trump is floating a second summit. And I got to be very honest, I think Trump's approach to China, in fact, to all of the Asian nations, is doomed to fail. And maybe that's what they really want. They want to be able to look like, hey, we tried to make a deal. We really worked so hard to try and come to a peaceful resolution where they just do what we tell them to do. But no, they just had to go and say no. So off to war. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about Korea. We're talking about, this, to me, rather ham-fisted approach of throwing more sanctions on North Korea. At the same time, you're trying to talk them into surrendering more of their weapons of deterrence here. And apparently, the United States is now resisting calls from the United Nations to provide humanitarian aid to North Korea. And the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said that $111 million is needed to fund humanitarian efforts in North Korea next year. And in response, a State Department spokesman said that North Korea can take care of their own humanitarian needs. All they have to do is stop building nuclear missiles and, long-range missiles and nuclear bombs here. And we promise we won't invade. They give up all their weapons of deterrence. We promise we'll leave them alone. Honest. Okay, last Thursday, there was a tweet that had a photo of a combat aircraft that resembled a fifth-generation Chinese fighter jet taken at the Savannah Hilton Head International Airport, which is a commercial and military use airport in Savannah, Georgia. And of course, it went viral, and there were all kinds of wild theories about why a Chinese stealth jet was parked on the tarmac of a Georgia military base. It turns out the aircraft is not real. It's a mock-up for use by the U.S. Marine Corps. Anyway, up in Afghanistan, Afghan forces have abandoned a remote district in the west of the country, leaving the area to Taliban insurgents. They're not really insurgents. They used to be the governor government rather, before the U.S. invasion. Notice how they use that word. They're insurgents. No, they just want their country back. Apparently, the problem was that the Afghan government, the installed puppet government, had failed to resupply the forces who were stationed there. The supply chain broke down. Now, the Taliban are, to be very honest, they're winning. At the end of 2001, they were all but eradicated, and now, as the story illustrates, they're taking back Afghanistan one bit at a time. So let's talk now about the Afghan opium, because under the Taliban, the opium cultivation had been eradicated. You were caught with a poppy, they'd take your hand off. Draconian, but it worked. As soon as the U.S. invaded, the poppies were blooming and cheap heroin was flooding the streets of the United States of America, opium going into the pharmaceutical companies, which has in turn led to this opiate crisis of people who trust their doctors being addicted. And people have said, why don't you stop the opium farmers over there? More about this after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about Afghanistan and how under the Taliban, opium cultivation was completely stopped. The Taliban understood how bad heroin is, and they simply cut it out. But Afghanistan produces really good opium. So as soon as the United States went on in, the poppies started blooming all over the place. And it resulted in drug problems, not only in the United States, but in Russia. And everybody was saying, why doesn't the new U.S.-backed government of Afghanistan shut down those opium farmers the way the Taliban did? And the U.S. government response has always been, well, they've got nothing else they could do to make money. Really, it would be just cruel to make these people stop growing and selling opium because they couldn't make the money. Well, it turns out not so much, because apparently Afghan authorities want to start replacing the poppy fields with saffron production, which is already underway, and it's risen to record levels this year in the country. And for those of you who don't know what it is, saffron is the world's most expensive spice. And apparently more than 6,600 saffron workers have been trained on production, processing, and packaging of the spice this year, according to the government statement. So it looks like they are going to get rid of the opium poppies and replace it with saffron. So what's the United States going to do? Go back on into Afghanistan and change the government yet again? Declare saffron cultivation to be a crime? Anyway, turning to domestic politics, as you've probably heard by now, Michael Cohen, who's the former lawyer for Donald Trump, was sentenced to 3 years in prison on a wide variety of charges, including tax evasion and lying to Congress. Now, an interesting little detail has surfaced over the handling of General Michael Flynn. Newly filed court documents allege FBI officials coerced Michael Flynn into foregoing a lawyer during the interview that would lead to a guilty plea on one count of making false statements. Now, Flynn was Trump's national security advisor at the time, and his lawyers are arguing the FBI went out of their way to create a perjury trap. And they're alleging that the FBI officials and other agents who interviewed Flynn failed to warn him of any consequences if he should make a false statement during the interview. They wanted Flynn to be relaxed. Apparently, on one of the FD 302 forms, McCabe and other FBI officials discussed that they would not warn Flynn that it was a crime to lie during an FBI interview because they wanted Flynn to be relaxed and they were concerned that giving the warnings might adversely affect the rapport. They wanted Flynn to think they were allies, and they weren't. They set him up. So now Roger Stone has come on out responding to Democrats who've accused him of lying to Congress as part of his testimony for the Russia probe. And he's challenging the Democrats to produce evidence. He says, if Congressman Swalwell or Congressman Castro or Congressman Schiff have evidence of Russian collusion or WikiLeaks collaboration on my part, let them produce it. They have none. This was in an interview on Hill TV on Tuesday. And Stone bemoaned the questioning from lawmakers, claiming it has devolved into perjury traps or some other highly trumped-up process crime. And it's ridiculous. He went on to say, my testimony before the House Intelligence Committee is 100% accurate. I'm no longer interested in the frivolous word games of the parsing of the words, the immaterial, or I should say non-material hair splitting. And he's absolutely right about that. The whole Russia collusion situation, the Mueller investigation, they're not digging after facts. They can't find any. So they've turned it into a game. You know, we're going to sucker somebody into making a misstep, and then we're going to throw them in jail for it here. Now, Google's CEO has just revealed how much money the evil Russian meddlers spent influencing the 2016 elections. $4,700. That's it. That's it. And the Democrats were just in high dudgeon. Those evil Russians, look what they did. $4,700. I paid more than that for my car. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, Google is starting to get into trouble in other countries over some of its behavior, and apparently they are currently being fined in Russia because they're reluctant to abide by Russia's legislation. And apparently, according to Russian media watchdog Vadim Subotin, he's saying if the fines fail to make a foreign company change its ways, there's a chance legislation will be changed that will make it possible to block access to Google in Russia. So apparently Google has been fined before for its non-compliance with Russian legislation. So anyway, Alexandria occasionally has a Cortex, went on out and attacked John Kelly as a coward. So apparently she went after White House Chief of Staff John Kelly yesterday. She wants him to apologize to Democrat Representative Frederica Wilson for supposedly lying about her to reporters. And she came on out and said he absolutely owes her an apology, and his refusal to do so isn't a sign of strength, it's cowardice. Now, that's quite a big word to use when you remember that John Kelly is a 4-star Marine Corps general who lost his son in Afghanistan. He's a Gold Star father. Okay. All right, here's an interesting article. This is out of Global Research, and they do a lot of really good work. And they're talking about Russiagate, the Mueller investigation, and now the Clinton Foundation. And basically, they're looking back on all that's been going on. They're talking about Comey's being forced to appear at a closed-door hearing by Republicans, at which he said, I don't remember, something like hundreds of times. And they're saying, you know, for 2 years, We have just been inundated with leaks and claims of Russian bias on behalf of Trump's candidacy, the special counsel, and now it's burned out. And what is left? Well, the focus is starting to turn towards Hillary Clinton, James Comey, and to the controversial and highly interesting Clinton Foundation. And I think the public's interest is turning that way as well. Now, there was a report earlier that U.S. Attorney John Huber's testimony, which was supposed to take place back on the 5th, then because of the death of George Herbert Walker Bush, it was pushed until tomorrow on the 13th. There is a story floating around from One American News that Huber's testimony tomorrow has been canceled. I have not been able to confirm this. It could be that somebody just wants people to not bother tuning in and listening. Oh, it's been canceled, then we'll watch something else on TV. If it has in fact been canceled, it tells us just how terrified the deep state is on these revelations about the Clinton Foundation. So, all right. Tulsi Gabbard is starting to make all the moves to indicate she's serious about a 2020 run. She's made visits to the first 2 voting states of the presidential primary, and she's looking to tap the same progressive firm that helped Bernie Sanders in 2016. So she's going to do it. Now, I don't agree with Tulsi on everything, but I think some new young blood is definitely due in Washington, D.C. All right, let's talk about the economy here. The U.S. debt is nearing $22 trillion as storm clouds indicate another financial crisis. Now, today they had a really good day on the stock market because apparently trade war fears appear to be easing. There was some progress made between China and Trump yesterday, despite this Huawei incident. But according to the U.S. Treasury, the debt of the federal government is currently sitting at $21,854,296,000. I'm sorry, it's a lot. Okay, it's nearing 22 trillion, and we're likely to hit that next month. It is a crisis. Nothing's being done about it. Nothing has ever been done about it. When Barack Obama entered the White House in 2008, the U.S. government was $10.6 trillion in debt, which means we've more than doubled that debt in less than 11 years. In another couple of years, the U.S. government will be spending more on the interest on the national debt than it spends on defense. And we have the largest defense budget in the world. All right, we have another caller on the line. Joe in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I was watching a few of these YouTubes with did you see anything about those envelopes that they got at the Bush funeral? It looked like in those handouts that the officials were given, you know how like some people got an envelope. Hillary got one. Biden's wife got one, Pence's wife got one, and George Bush Jr. got one. And there's one part where Carter's actually watching Hillary open hers and looking through his program wondering how come I didn't get one. But anyway, they show on one of the videos, they show the Secret Service agent giving one to George Bush, and Laura takes it. And she opens the envelope and shows it to Jeb, and Jeb looks absolutely horrified as Laura Bush looks stunned also. And I just very, very curious what was in that envelope. And what's very interesting to me is why nobody else is asking that question.
Well, I don't know about looking horrified or not, but, given the public venue, I would rather expect more than likely it was some kind of a communication, a personal note in the middle of the grand funeral here. As to what Jeb Bush was horrified about, I really don't know. But given that he was handed the envelope by the Secret Service, I don't think there was anything dangerous in there.
Well, I'm not saying it's dangerous. It's just it's very curious. It's very odd. He was actually shown it by Laura. The Secret Service agent handed it to, and there's a interesting Q quote where he says, "Watch the wives." And when you watch it, like I said, you watch Hillary get hers, Biden gets one, Pence gets one, but you don't see him open it. The only one you really see open it is Hillary, who just looks blank, has a blank stare, and then Laura Bush, who looks shocked, and then she shows it to Jeb, and he looks pretty shocked too. So it's one of those things you have to really see it and watch their expressions to kind of get a feel for it. I don't know what it is.
Could you send me that video? I didn't see that part of the video. Okay, I knew about the envelopes. I didn't know about Laura and Jeb Bush appearing shocked when they opened it. But I'd like to see that video for myself if you could send that along.
Okay, I'll definitely send it to you. And if you don't get it, just YouTube, and you'll see just YouTube funeral envelope. And there's a lot of like 3 or 4 minute videos where people just show their reactions and who got the envelope. And one of the funnier parts is Carter looking through his brochure, not getting one, and looking kind of disappointed. Just kind of odd. But he's such a good person that he's not part of any of the shenanigans, and that doesn't surprise me that Carter wasn't included. The one thing that I take from it, and it ties into what you were talking about with Michael Flynn, and that is Pence. I think Pence is a rat. I think Pence was part of the whole taking down of Flynn right from the start, which really started everything. The takedown of General Flynn as National Security Advisor was done right from the start. It was a conspiracy, in my view. Pence was part of it, and it basically led to the special prosecutor against Trump. And I think Pence is dirty, and I'm hoping that something to do in those envelopes has to do with the coming indictments. I really and I hope he's one of them that is indicted.
Well, so, that would be such an inappropriate place for that kind of thing to be done. And the Secret Service, couldn't deliver them. I mean, did it look like a business-size envelope?
No, it looked more like a card you'd get, like a birthday card.
Yeah, okay.
Well,
you're not going to get a summons or a process served inside that. It probably was a card, and maybe again, send me the video about Laura and Jeb if you would, and I'll take a look at it myself.
Yeah, I'll send you the best one. There was one today I saw that was pretty much the best definitive one. So it really, I'm really curious. Also, like I said, when something like this happens and nobody like from the mainstream even brings it up, I always find it curious. It's like the dog that doesn't bark, and it's one of those things. All these guys are getting envelopes at this big, important funeral, and nobody's asked them like, "Hey, what was in that envelope you got?"
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just my nature about these things. So I'll send you a link and have a nice day.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And if it was just some kind of social, sharing a card, bereavement at which time, I'm not surprised Jimmy Carter would not have gotten one because Carter was very much aware of how Bush sabotaged his presidency and had the October surprise. And so I'm sure that they would not really be on speaking terms here. Okay, we're talking about the economic news here. Right now, 50% of global stocks are in a bear market. And like I said, today the stock market is doing well over the easing of trade fears, but I don't think we're really out of the woods on this. There are larger macroeconomic forces at work here. So 2018 overall is the worst year for the stock markets since the 2008 financial crisis. Japan's third quarter gross domestic product is the worst in 4 years, negative 2.5%. Now, China, and this may not help with the easing of concerns, China has now stopped buying all United States oil. They haven't bought a drop of U.S. oil for the last 3 months, just 2 months after a record-setting $1 billion in shipments. And apparently this refusing to buy U.S. oil is part of China's response to the U.S. tariffs. So, over in Iran, they are setting up more and more direct currency swaps with several countries in order to bypass U.S. sanctions. And again, as I've said before, the world economy is reorganizing itself with the United States no longer at the center. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And a reminder, we are in December. We're halfway through December almost. And so if you're going to take advantage of the Front Sight Firearm Academy promotion, you have to do it before the end of the month. And just imagine what kind of a Christmas present that was going to make. And speaking of Christmas, another reminder that the Christmas music you're hearing on our bumps is created by Claire, and you can get it off of iTunes and enjoy. So anyway, getting on back to the economic news here. Iran is engaging in a little bit of gloating, saying that the U.S. had failed in its promise to cut Iran's oil revenues to zero, and that Iran is ready to face even worse conditions. But with all of these countries that are signing direct currency swap deals with Iran, the sanctions fangs, as it were, are being pulled. Down in South Africa, they're moving ahead with their land reform program. It's set to officially start in March of next year. And they're calling it land reform, but it's basically a land grab, where they're just confiscating the farmlands of white farmers who have been in South Africa for generation after generation, and they're going to apportion it out among the black population, which makes for good politics but bad farming, because Zimbabwe went through this and it didn't work out. It resulted in hunger and massive inflation, to the point where people in Zimbabwe were walking around literally with paper notes that said $100 million on them. Anyway, it's going to be a mistake, and it's going to be a disaster over there. Okay, getting on over to Great Britain, as we reported earlier in the show, Theresa May did survive the vote of no confidence. She's still the Prime Minister, but she's still in hot water over the Brexit deal, which looks like there's no way Parliament will pass it. Theresa May cannot get any new concessions from Brussels. And I don't know, Theresa May be walking around in the back saying, can we count the votes on that no confidence vote again? I'm sure I lost. Let's get somebody else in here. But there are a lot of people who are still calling for her to step down. And prior to the no confidence vote, Theresa May did announce that she would stand down before the next general election. She was not going to run again for Prime Minister. Well, now that she survived her no confidence vote, whether she'll keep that promise or not remains to be seen. Okay, apparently the British government is funding military-grade psyops to smear Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. And apparently there was this document that came on out that had a section titled NATO Definition of PSYOPs Allied Administrative Publication. And it defines psychological operations as planned activities using methods of communication and other means directed at approved audiences in order to influence perceptions, attitudes, and behavior affecting the achievement of political and military objectives. Okay? Well, this is exactly what the British media and the British government have been doing. In fact, all governments are doing it. Our government does it all the time. There actually used to be a law in this country against the government using propaganda on the American people. They did it anyway, but they were pretending that they weren't doing it. Then they changed the law and they said, yeah, we have to propagandize the people. Remember George W. Bush and that little video where he says, you know, we got to catapult the propaganda forward. Just admitting that they're lying to us to control us. You know, we talk about what's going on in France in the Yellow Vest protest and why are they protesting back and forth. I'll tell you the one common theme that's probably in all of these protests, whether it's France or Belgium or Netherlands or Sweden. There was a Yellow Vest protest up there. I think the people of the world are protesting against governments constantly treating them like they're morons and idiots. Because it is very, very angering. Anyway, Jeremy Corbyn is in hot water again. Apparently, he was invited by the leader of the Israeli Labor Party to go to Israel to visit the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum. And apparently he has not replied. And that's enough for them to get in high dudgeon and start screaming. And there's no making these people happy. So why bother trying, I think. All right, we're here at another commercial break, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about immigration, Brexit, so forth. Apparently, there was this United Nations migration meeting where they were pushing that migration pact. And the Italian delegation basically got up and walked out saying that national borders are no business of the United Nations. And of course, that's part of the agenda of this migration pact is the United Nations taking control of national borders. Pew Research Center study came on out and said there is no majority of citizens anywhere in the world that supports increasing immigration levels to their home nation. They surveyed 27 nations, not a single one said, yes, let's have more immigrants. In fact, less than 15% of the median total of the 27 nation citizens supported plans to increase immigration. Here in the United States, they were probably all Democrats here. Now, over in Germany, there has been a string of legal complaints filed by people asking the Federal Constitutional Court to prevent the government of Germany from joining that UN migration pact. And the highest court, unfortunately, sided with the government and the UN. They had 13 separate plaintiffs and basically said that no, they're not going to intervene. Meanwhile, and this may or may not be related, there was a riot in Bavaria, 11 people injured as a result, and the riot took place in a so-called anchor center for migrants. And several Eritrean nationals apparently attacked security staffers and policemen with stones and metal bars, as well as setting the building on fire. And a police raid later revealed drugs and stolen goods. Now, apparently there was another outburst in the Upper Franconian Anchor Center for Migrants in the northern Bavarian town of Bamberg. Police were called to the site after a disturbance was reported. The patrol that first arrived on the scene was attacked with paving stones and other objects. Reinforcements had to be deployed surrounding the building. So, oh yeah, sure, let's keep those borders open and bring in more of these people. Now, over in Egypt, President al-Sisi came on out with what I think is a wonderful observation. And he was responding to a question about why world leaders are closing their doors to immigration. And El-Sisi said, I don't want to go very deep into this issue. Every country has the right to protect its people and their interests and should respect human rights, but in a framework that allows it to preserve its national interests. Instead of asking why these countries are closing their doors to immigration, you should be asking yourself why Afghans in Afghanistan don't care about the fate of their country. Why, for the last 40 years, have they been killing each other and self-destructing? This also applies to Pakistan, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and Somalia. Why are they doing this? Well, he raises a very, very good point. If your country is in trouble, you're not going to solve it by leaving and going someplace else. And as we're seeing all over Europe, it's just dragging Europe down to the same level as the countries these people were coming from in the first place. Now, yes, it's true that in a lot of cases, the reason for the discord in these countries is a direct result of overt and covert U.S. military intervention. But again, don't they have a sense of national pride or identity? Now, you want to talk about arrogance. Apparently, 2 groups of Central American migrants marched to the U.S. consulate in Tijuana on Tuesday with a list of demands. One of the groups demanded that Donald Trump either let them all into the United States or pay them $50,000 each to go home. You want to talk about arrogance. Anyway, maybe they think we're still the world's richest nation, which we are, but it's all in the hands of the billionaires. Now, people are still talking about this very public shouting match that Donald Trump got into with Nancy Pelosi and Chucky Schumer over the border wall. And it was embarrassing and it was unseemly. It was also entertaining. Let's be honest. It was kind of fun to watch them go at it. And Nancy Pelosi did something that I think is very unseemly for a member of Congress. She basically came on out and, according to the Washington Post, questioned the manhood of the U.S. president. And apparently what she said was, it's like a manhood thing for him, as if manhood could ever be associated with him, this wall thing. It goes to show you, you get into a tinkle contest with a skunk, you get tinkle all over you. And again, that's unseemly. By the way, have you ever seen a picture of Nancy Pelosi's home in San Francisco? It's got a big wall all around it. Really big wall. Wall's good for Nancy Pelosi, not for you, though, here. But the Democrats are being a little hypocritical here. In February of this year, 44 Democrats, including Schumer, voted for a bill that included $25 billion for a wall. What's going on now is they want Trump to lose more than they want the country to win. And of course, Schumer and Pelosi don't mind funding that wall in Gaza. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about political correctness, because it is getting out of control. Article out of endoftheamericandream.com. The next generation of America's thought police is being birthed on our college campuses. And they're talking about where all of this censorship really came from. There's a national movement to combat offensive speech, and this movement has been working very hard to scrub college campuses clean of words, ideas, and subjects that might cause discomfort or give offense. The problem is, as I've mentioned before, just about anything that you might say or think is going to deeply offend someone. And frankly, I find your being offended to be highly offensive. So you try and work that one out. That's the issue. What happens when you're on a college campus and somebody who's a fundamental Christian, walks into an astronomy class and is told that the Earth is not the center of the solar system? Are they going to censor the astronomy professor? I mean, that's how ridiculous it's going to be. Now, over at the University of London, they have this student club, and they're making comedians who are performing there sign a behavioral agreement. And apparently, the form stated, by signing this contract, you are agreeing to our no-tolerance policy with regards to racism, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, or anti-religion or anti-atheism. This prompted one of the comedians to say, "What can I joke about?" At which point he promptly canceled his performance there. You cannot have freedom of speech and an offensive-free environment. The two are mutually exclusive. Okay, we're going to revisit a story that happened a little while back. This took place at an elementary school in Nebraska, and the principal decided to make this list banning certain things associated with Christmas and approving other permitted forms of celebration. So Jennifer Sinclair, the principal at Manchester Elementary School, put out this list. And the list said of things that were not acceptable. You couldn't have Santas or Christmas items, clip art on worksheets. Couldn't have Christmas trees in the classrooms. Couldn't have the elf on the shelf, because that's Christmas related. You couldn't sing Christmas carols. You couldn't play Christmas music. You couldn't send a scholastic book that is a Christmas book that's Christmas related. You couldn't make a Christmas ornament as a gift. Candy canes were banned. Wearing red and green together was banned. Any image of a reindeer was banned. Christmas videos, movies, and characters from Christmas movies were banned. The acceptable list included gifts to students, snowmen, snowwomen, snow people, snowflakes, gingerbread people, holidays around the world, sledding, hot chocolate, polar bears, penguins, scarves, boots, earmuffs, and hats. Well, the principal has now been placed on administrative leave, so strike a victory for tradition, because that really was over the top. And again, how you have a civil society is you respect your own traditions and beliefs first and foremost, but you also have respect for other people's beliefs. You don't go on the attack against them. And maybe the school principal felt that, well, mentioning Christmas was going to offend somebody, like Jewish students. Well, you know something? That's their problem. If they don't have a thick skin, if they don't have the tolerance for other people's points of view, or the Muslims for that matter. Now, interestingly enough, there is a new phenomenon that is starting out, and it's called Women Against Feminism. And apparently this is something that sprung up on Tumblr. And young women around the world are posting selfies protesting against some of these hardline feminist ideas and saying, we're not part of your agenda. You know, we're not assets for you to use to push things like Me Too. So there's a backlash beginning, which I think would be a good thing. Okay, over in Philadelphia, which is the birthplace of our Constitution, but is doing something quite unconstitutional, and that's civil asset forfeiture. And it's become so corrupt and far-reaching, it's referred to as a perverse machine. Now, what's really interesting is when this first surfaced, it was the Philadelphia Inquirer that ran news articles saying, this is a bad idea. This idea that police can simply confiscate your property on the mere suspicion of having committed a crime. Now, there's been a 4-year legal battle brought by the nonprofit law firm, the Institute for Justice, and the city has agreed to a settlement that will give its abusive forfeiture program a major overhaul and protect the rights of Philadelphia property owners. Now, civil forfeiture was supposed to be about stripping criminals of their ill-gotten gains, Where it went off the tracks is it's being used as a revenue generating system by police who are targeting citizens who have committed no crime at all. And they'll play this little game. They'll take your property and then they'll say, we'll give you back half of what you had as long as you sign this agreement. You won't talk about this or sue us. So, story coming out of Investment Watch blog talking about more voices being silenced, and it is happening. Apparently, Gavin McInnes was one of the more recent ones, but they're noticing that the pace of these deplatformings is picking up ever since Alex Jones was taken down. Now, regardless of what someone preaches, if it is not calling for literal violence, not some indirect hate speech, then we all have an ethical dilemma with silencing the thoughts of others. Yet the corporate media is applauding these companies like Twitter and Facebook and Google as if they're doing some sort of social salvation. Silencing unpopular opinion is becoming protocol. Worse, it's becoming normalized, acceptable. That's how it began in Nazi Germany here. Now, the good news is that YouTube has caved in and Gavin got his channel back. Down in Australia, a Melbourne court has convicted the Vatican's finance chief, Cardinal George Pell, of sexually abusing two choir boys in the 1990s when he was the Archbishop of Melbourne. And apparently he has now also been removed from the Council of Cardinals. So don't do the crime if you can't do the time there. There is a pedophilia problem in the church. It's one of those things that people don't want to face up to. Oh, I'm going against God. And you know, a lot of these predatory priests, they'll use that. They'll tell these little kids, if you tell anybody, you're going to go to hell when you die. What a terrible thing to do to a child here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about computers, computer technology. Apparently over in China, there is now a crackdown on political speech on Chinese Twitter. And apparently, according to China Change, which is a human rights advocacy site, hundreds of Twitter users have been detained and interrogated by national security police officers since September of this year. In most cases, police have asked, if not forced, users to delete their posts or their accounts. So, truth is becoming an endangered species on planet Earth. Okay. Here's a strange one. Facebook has filed a patent to calculate your location in the future. They apparently are claiming they have the technology which would use location data, which I presume is gathered by the Facebook app on your smartphone, to predict where you're going to go based on your previous travel patterns. And Facebook's response when asked about this obvious privacy violating thing said, we file patents on tons of stuff we never actually implement. So forget about it. There's nothing to see here. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. Now, Italy has fined Facebook $11 million for illegally collecting user data. And it's starting to come out more and more that these social media platforms are engaged in massive spying on everyone on planet Earth, primarily for marketing purposes, but probably also on behalf of the government. But the Italian Competition Authority said on Friday it's fined Facebook 10 million euros for illegally harvesting its users' data for commercial purposes. Now, the authorities found that Facebook was in violation of Articles 21 and 22 of the Code of Consumer Rights fraudulently encouraged consumers to register on its platform without informing them immediately and properly during the activation of their accounts of its data collection activities for commercial purposes. Now, as you know, one of the arguments about the censoring that's going on in social media platforms is that they're private companies and they have a right to choose who they're going to do business with and who they won't do business with. This coming from the exact same people who went ballistic over bakers who refused to make gay wedding cakes, just to show you the hypocrisy. But as it turns out, Facebook is not private. They are partnered with a NATO-backed think tank to censor their platform that is funded by the United States government. And so this comes into an issue of, if you have the U.S. government funding censorship, that's a violation of the First Amendment. It really, really is. Now, Congress could fix this if they really wanted to, and I imagine the Republicans certainly ought to think about this while they still have control of the Congress. And that would be to pass a law declaring these large corporate social media platforms to be publishers. See, as long as they're called platforms, they can pretty much do whatever they want, and they're doing a lot of bad things. But if they were declared to legally fit the role of being a publisher, then the laws governing publishers, which includes equal access, equal treatment, would come into effect. That might be worth a phone call to a congressional office here. Getting on back to Google's CEO, Sundar Pichai, and the interview last week, Congressman Steve King raised a question about notifications that his granddaughter got on her iPhone during search results, at which point Pichai chided the congressman, saying, the iPhone is made by a different company. Apple makes the iPhone. Google provide the operating system for Android. And once again, it illustrates our government is being run by people who don't really know what it is they're talking about. And that's a little bit scary. Okay, there's the music. Time for station identification, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And here's an interesting story. It's a positive story. And this is starting to happen in a lot of places around the country. There is this town in Massachusetts that decided, rather than pay Comcast $500,000 for broadband of questionable quality, they are spending $1.4 million to build its own public fiber network, which is probably going to work an awful lot better. And it's not like building a network is all that difficult. Once you've got the fiber in there and hook it all together, it's really not that difficult. And I think it's a good idea that small, isolated communities might want to think about doing that in order to improve their internet service. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing fine, thank you.
That's great. That's great. And Claire, she's getting better, right?
Yes, slowly but surely.
Yeah, I know it's tough hurting yourself. Just before the break, you were talking about China, and there's no free speech in that country. But day before yesterday, you posted the article from the CBC on how that ex-diplomat from Canada was detained, like a little tit for tat, right?
Well, that's what a lot of people thought it was, and it probably is in fact that. But China is claiming that he violated their non-governmental organization law because he was in there doing work for his organization without actually having done the paperwork.
Yeah, or the paperwork got mysteriously, misplaced, or I don't know. Who knows? Anyways. I'm not saying anyone's innocent in this case, but the funny thing is Justin Trudeau, who was caught off guard, he's like, oh, I can't believe that this happened. And I sent you a link to a story that happened a few years ago where, Justin Trudeau was asked, what country, what administration do you admire? And he said China.
Yeah.
So this is how he feels about me, about the people that live in this country. He wants to turn this into China. It's sad.
Well,
it's sad
again, we need to be very, very careful, and I probably should have had this caveat in front of the story about the Twitter crackdown. We're in an age right now where we're being lied to about pretty much everything, and it's amazing where I'll talk to people and they'll say, well, China is this and China is that, and I'll say, oh, really? When did you get back from there? And they say, oh, I've never been to China. Oh, well, how do you know that this is going on? Well, I saw that on TV. And I'll say, is that the same TV told you Saddam had nuclear weapons? And usually there's a look of shock that comes in on them because unfortunately, yes, right now, most people still seem to think that being lied to by the government is a rare, maybe occasional thing. They don't realize it's a permanent, ongoing state of being.
Of course. Of course it is. Like you said, I haven't heard you say it in a long time, though. Like you say, if they were to start telling the truth, then we would know the difference.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely.
It's so funny. It's a shame, but at the same time, I mean, like the people I know and the people I talk to and associate, it's obvious what's going on. Mm-hmm. It's so they're hoping. When I say they, I mean the elites and the politicians and all these people. They're hoping that we're so busy with our own lives, with these cell phones glued to our eyes, working all these hours just to make ends meet, that we won't have time to figure out what they've been up to. And there is a lot of truth to that, Mike.
Yes,
there's a lot of truth to that, and it's too bad. But you know what? I screwed up. I should have seen this coming about 15 or 20 years ago, and at that point, I should have went to night school to become a chiropractor, because a lot of people's necks are going to be screwed up in the very near future.
Yes, that's already right? An emerging problem. And I'm noticing this holiday season, there are a lot of gift ideas that involve stands or frames that will hold your smart device at eye level so that you're not tipping your head forward, because that is becoming an issue.
Oh, and there's also the radiation. That problem too, from cell phones.
You mean the radio wave radiation? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there was that 10-year study that was done. It's no surprise. It shouldn't surprise anyone. I don't use a cell phone, Mike. I don't use any of these devices. I noticed you playing with your watch.
Yes.
It's almost like a smartwatch, I would suppose, right?
Yeah, it is. It's an Apple Watch here, but I figure at my age I'm going to die soon anyway, so I can go ahead and play with the toys. Well,
you're one of these techno guys, right?
True.
From way back.
Yes.
So, you got nothing to hide. You're already out there.
Yeah, I go all the way back to vacuum tubes. That'll give my age. I actually worked with vacuum tubes when I was a kid.
Yep, so did I. Tube amps. I play guitar. Anyways, you have a great show, Mike. Thanks for your time.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. The phone lines are open here. Okay, we have been talking for some time about this. They describe it as a polio-like disease. It is spreading. There is a record number of cases. And the official story is that experts have no idea what's causing children across the country to lose the ability to move their arms, legs, face, or back around a week after patients are diagnosed with a fever and respiratory illness. Now, when this first showed up, it was being diagnosed as polio, and immediately the medical industrial complex went ballistic and said, no, we can't call it that because we're marketing this polio vaccine. So they can't be having polio. Call it acute flaccid something or other. Well, now they're not even doing that. They're just saying it's polio-like. And the question, again, that nobody is bothering to ask is, how many of these children who came down with this polio-like disease had the polio vaccine? Because there was a known issue some years ago where the nasal polio vaccine, which used an attenuated pathogen, had a tendency to revert to full potency inside the body. You know, people are getting very, very cautious about vaccination, which is why now the government is saying, you will be vaccinated. We don't care if it causes your nose to fall off. You will get your vaccines. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Cameron in the United Kingdom, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call. Michael, it's in regard with something that you've mentioned a bit earlier regarding these refugees.
Yes.
I remember post 9/11, the refugees were really sort of nice. They used to try to basically, adopt the culture. They used to blend in. They used to be very polite. But after that, things changed somehow. Now, the way of looking at it is this, that maybe they actually we invade their countries and they invade ours. It's not a matter of national pride. I think they do have national pride, and that's why they're doing this. Because we're killing their civilians, we're killing their children with advanced weaponry, with from air, and the ones that we don't do openly, we do covertly, like Yemen.
Yes.
So I mean, let's be. I mean, I am against this surge of refugees. Let me declare that before anything. But I mean, let's put it this way: they blame us, rightly so, because we're sitting here. I mean, I myself spend 5-6 hours a day on Twitter, try to wake people up, as it were. But it's not enough, Michael. It's not enough. The governments do what they want to do because all we do is on the keyboard. All we do is try to sort of wake other people up in order for them to wake other people up, but nothing happens, Michael. And this is the other way of looking at it.
Well, I understand that a lot of those refugees coming through the open borders probably have reasons to hate the countries they're going into, which makes them even more dangerous, which makes that whole open border policy even more suicidal.
Well, absolutely. I agree with you 100%, Michael. But this is where we come in as people. We have to do something about it, us. Nobody's in the government's going to help us. Nobody's going to come and say, well, in our parliament or your Senate, say, well, let's close the borders. That's not going to happen, Michael. We can't afford our politicians anymore.
No, we really can't. But again, I'm looking at what's going on in France right now, and Belgium, and the Netherlands, and Sweden, and thinking this could be the beginning of a grassroots pushback against all of this New World Order nonsense. And I don't want to see people get injured and killed. That's unfortunately, sadly, already happened. But people have just had enough. You can only oppress a people so far when they finally say, I really don't have anything left to lose, and I'm going to go take a chance that a future generation could have a better life.
Well, I agree with you, Michael. 100% I agree with you. And I hope so. I mean, again, I hate this word hope, but I do hope so. I really do hope that at some stage, people everywhere stand up and say enough is enough. And yes, I mean, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be clean, Michael. I mean, these people print money. So it's good for us to wait for them to implode, but will they? I mean, they're international cartel. They take money from one pocket, put it in the other to heal each other, so to speak. So, I mean, where do we stand with this, Michael? I mean, how long can we wait? How long can those people wait? How long can Yemenis wait? How long can Palestinians wait? that's my thing, Michael. And thanks very much for taking my call. I take your comment offline. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it does seem like the craziness in the world is clearly escalating. The chaos, all the wars, all the conflicts, the psychopathy of our national leaders, and it seems to be building to a head where there's going to be some kind of a crisis. Now, again, I see the best outcome for the world in a collapse of the United States government. And with all the infighting that's going on here, it's very clear that the government has become badly factionalized, and they're fighting back and forth, trying to hide all the corruption from the public, from the independent media, from the opposition party. And as I said, if the full nature of the Clinton Foundation were to come out, if what I think is the dark secret behind the email server came on out, the federal government couldn't survive that. And it would come on down, and we would have to be prepared to take care of ourselves and each other for about maybe 4 to 5 months while we craft a new government for this land, one that would go back to the original constitutional principles of authority and power to the states and local communities, a very limited role for the central government, severe restrictions on its authority. No more private central banking. That's going to be right at the top of the list, carved in granite. But it does feel like we've reached a point, as we are seeing in France, people are just not going to take anymore. You know, what was that line from
your mouth to God's ears?
I'm sorry?
I said, as they say, from your mouth to God's ears, if there is a God, Michael. But thank you very much.
You're welcome. And again, I think back to that much used quote from the movie Network, "I'm mad as heck, and I'm not going to take this anymore." I think that's what the French are saying, and the world is listening here. All right, we're going to take another phone call from Jim in Texas. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I've been thinking about this Iranian money that Obama, quote, gave to Iran. What, didn't we seize their assets when they seized the embassy? Wasn't that money theirs?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It was their money to begin with, and Trump is dangling it back to them as bait. You know, if you'll do what we say, we'll give you this money. And Iran is saying it's already ours. You stole it.
Well, I mean, when Obama sent all this money, wasn't he returning the seized assets, or am I mistaken?
Yeah, when Obama sent that money, okay, we have a bad phone connection. I think I'm hearing you correctly. But yeah, when they sent that money to Iran, they were actually returning Iran's money.
Yeah, well, the right always seems to make it out like Obama sent this money, just on a whim, All right, that's all I had, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. Now, getting on back to science and medicine here. We're talking about vaccines and why there is reason to doubt that they're effective, and even worse, that they may, in many cases, be quite harmful. And there's this article that came on out basically talking about how back in 2004, the CDC published what has become a very notorious study that allegedly disproved the causal link between the MMR vaccine and autism. But later, one of the original scientists involved in the study, Dr. William Thompson, basically blew the whistle, saying that the CDC had doctored the results to hide the potential dangers of the MMR vaccine to placate the vaccine industry. And don't forget, the CDC is not a government agency. It's a private entity, and they own the patents on some 20 vaccines. They make billions of dollars off of vaccinations. Now, getting on back to what happened there, Dr. Julie Gerbending of the CDC ordered Thompson to stay silent. And not so shockingly, considering the revolving door between CDC and Big Pharma, Dr. Gerbending would eventually leave the CDC to become head of the vaccine department at Merck, the maker of the MMR vaccine she covered for. Now, Dr. Brian Hooker on dissecting the original CDC 2004 study, wrote a paper, Measles, Mumps, Rubella Vaccination Timing and Autism Among Young African American Boys, a reanalysis of the CDC data. And the conclusions basically came on out saying that the younger a child was when they received the MMR vaccine, the more likely they were to become autistic, and that this trend was especially prevalent in African American males. And that this in turn has led to a borderline, if you will, racist stereotype that black boys under 3 years, black boys get more autism. Now, recently, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Children's Health Defense published a rethinking by the medical profession and its journals that there is, in fact, scientific merit in Dr. Hooker's findings. That African American boys under 3 years of age who were vaccinated with the MMR vaccine were much more likely to become autistic. But it makes money. It makes money, and that's a good thing. Okay, do you remember the movie Forrest Gump? I'm sure we all do. It was a wonderful movie. And there was obviously the sequence where Forrest Gump was in Vietnam. And if you remember correctly, Forrest Gump was mentally challenged. And so was his buddy, Bubba. And it turns out that actually has a basis in history. And when we come on back from this next commercial break, I'll explain that story, and we got another caller on the line. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And if you would like to support Republic Broadcasting, and come on, it's the holiday season, just put Republic Broadcasting on your gift list and the postal address where you can send a very nice Christmas card containing a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash. The address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can call in with a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And don't forget that Front Sight Firearms Academy promotion ends the end of this month. Okay, so getting on back to us, as I started to say before the commercial break, we all remember the movie Forrest Gump, where Forrest Gump is in Vietnam. And of course, the whole point of the movie was Forrest Gump was mentally challenged and somehow managed to get through life. And of course, he had his buddy, Bubba, who was also portrayed as mentally challenged here. And it turns out this is based on something that actually happened. During the Vietnam War, Defense Secretary Robert McNamara deliberately lowered mental standards so that they could induct 354,000 low IQ men. It was known as Project 100,000, otherwise known as McNamara's Folly. The death toll was absolutely appalling from this. Okay, so let's go back to the phones. Sheldon in Spokane, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, sir. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
I talked to you a while back, and I asked you to watch a movie. It was talking about, the subject of the day was body parts and stuff. And did you ever watch Never Let Me Go?
No, I didn't, and I apologize, but there's only so many hours in the day and so much Michael to go around, and especially with caring for Claire over this last year, things got a little tight.
No, I get it, but I was just out in the garage and I want to ask you a question about probably a couple pages ago. Do you really think there's going to be that much civility in either a hard or a soft reset, that people are going to just be nice and behave and mind their manners for 4 or 5 months till we get back on back on the rails again, or do you think there's going to be major looting and stuff, and all the debt will be buried by the first 2 months, or what? I don't see us just picking up our shoes and taking off where we left off.
I think there's going to be some of both. I think certainly in the inner cities, you're going to see a lot of looting. You're going to see a lot of violence. I think the more rural you get, the more you're going to see your communities really try and pull together. And I'm basing that on the experience that Claire and I had when we were living in Washington State. We were in this little town out in the Cascade Mountains, and the sense of community there was very strong. And for us coming from Southern California, it was almost a bit of a shock about how, people wanted to help us out, engage with us, basically be friends, get to know us. It was very pleasant. It reminded me very much of the farming town I grew up in as a child. But you're right, there's probably going to be some upset. The question is, how much and where. Now, if we're talking about a collapse of the central federal U.S. government, the state governments and local governments will still be functioning. And so you're still going to have the law enforcement that's going to be out there to keep a lid on a lot of this stuff.
That's true, but there aren't enough state police to go around. So you're saying it's going to be the smaller communities you think are going to be more like the film The Postman with Costner, with the big 2-ton blocks, and that's the entry gates to, just like the old castle days then, huh?
Well, no, I don't see it as happening like that. And, Costner, of course, was going through his apocalyptic phase, with Waterworld and all the rest of that. But right. I don't see us returning to the days of building castles, because castles can be brought down very easily now.
No, I just meant isolation, that these small little burgs would put up an outer perimeter and be guarded and so forth from city people.
It may be necessary. Obviously they're going to have to pull together with their community. But again, we're talking about a collapse of the central federal government. The state and local governments are still going to be operational. And with the police they have right now, there's not a lot of that sort of behavior going on. I don't really think that would change dramatically. And right now is the time to start building that sense of community around where you live. About making friends with your neighbors, put down your cell phone, start meeting people face to face, start talking to them, and start building those relationships, finding out who's got what skills that might be needed, and just start getting ready now, because it's probably going to hit before much longer. Anyway, listen, gotta let you go. Okay. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. And earlier in the week, I was decrying the sorry state of food production and transportation in this country. And that was in light of several recent recalls. And there has now been another one. Jimmy Dean's sausage links have been recalled, along with ready-to-eat pork and poultry products, 29,000 pounds. And if you've got it in your freezer, check with the store if they're part of the recall. Possible metal contamination. Now, there haven't been any reports of injuries yet, but the government still classified the recall as a high health risk, defined as a reasonable probability that the use of the product will cause serious adverse health consequences or death. So I'm going to take a wild guess here that at some point they were dismantling and cleaning the meat grinder, and somebody noticed that chunks had broken off. And so where are they going to go? Well, they have to be there in the meat product here. Over at DuPont, they have opened a factory in Saudi Arabia that will produce reverse osmosis water filters. Now, reverse osmosis is one of the best ways to filter water, including chemicals such as PFAS, a chemical made and used by DuPont that has caused widespread water contamination around the world. So what a sweet deal for DuPont. They sell this chemical. They make a lot of money off of that. It basically contaminates drinking water around the world. So now they're going to start selling water filters. Which, by the way, water filters are a really good thing in this day and age. Now, we have really good water here in Hawaii. Back when this whole Flint, Michigan thing kicked up, I went to eBay and I got a water testing kit. It was about $30, I think, that carried out about 6 or 7 different tests, including metal contamination, bacteria. And the only thing that was notable about the tap water coming out here is that it's very, very hard, which makes sense when you realize we're sucking it out from inside an extinct volcano. But if you're concerned about your water quality, and you ought to be in this day and age, a water testing kit might be a really good Christmas present. And if the test comes out less than wonderful, maybe having a water filter of some kind. Alrighty, Tulsi Gabbard. Now, she's running in 2020, and I like her, but I don't agree with a lot of her policies. She's a strong opponent of Second Amendment gun rights here. And now she's come on out with this rather bizarre comment that climate change may lead to protein and zinc deficiencies. And she's out there saying the effects of climate change disproportionately devastate coastal and low-lying communities. So she's still talking about global warming and rising sea levels. And obviously she's playing to her local constituents here in Hawaii, who are always having to deal with water coming up over the beaches when there are tsunamis and storms here. But she's out there pushing to pass what's called the OFF Act, to try and transition the United States off of fossil fuels to a 100% clean energy economy by 2035. Now, there are a couple of problems with that. Other nations that have tried that transition, it has failed rather miserably because of the inefficiencies of solar cells, the fact that the wind farms don't last as long as they're supposed to, and there's still no real efficient way of storing that much electricity for periods when it's dark and the wind isn't blowing. The other problem, of course, is that after years of efforts, the United States is now energy independent in oil and petroleum. We've become a net exporter of oil and natural gas. And so Tulsi's comments about getting off of petroleum-based products are probably not going to sit well with big petrol, as they were. Another little story here from 12160.0. Now they're blaming animal bites on climate change. And they're basically saying that as global temperatures continue to rise, the habitats of arthropods, such as spiders, mosquitoes, ticks, and centipedes, getting cooler. And right now they are forecasting a massive blizzard for Christmas, for Snowmageddon. All right, we got a caller on the line, Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Remember when they went after cow flatulence?
Yeah, that one didn't last too long. That? Yeah, there really wasn't a way to deal with that. It was just a way to tax people that buy beef, I guess, right? Yeah, that was it. That was it. They were going to tax you for buying beef because of the cow flatulence, forgetting, of course, that methane in air decomposes. It doesn't last very long. In fact, that's one of the reasons that one of the orbiters around Mars was trying to detect methane. In fact, some of the rovers detecting methane, because they understand it could be produced by biological activity, and if it keeps renewing, then something's going on underneath the soil.
Most Americans probably don't know what flatulence means.
Well, I'm not about to educate them. But, you know, what's really interesting, though, is that they're talking about cow flatulence. They don't mention the far larger human flatulence, not to mention all the methane that is pouring out of those fracking wells.
A lot of flatulence in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of rats there, too, I've been hearing lately, huh?
Yeah.
You hear about the rat infestations in
Oh, they've had a rat problem for a long time. They've had that for a long, long time. They're not keeping their own city clean. In fact, it's kind of interesting. Using Google Earth, I'll pseudo tour Washington, D.C. And by the way, have you noticed they've taken out all the 3D buildings around the White House? They don't want anybody getting angle calculations or anything from that. But just zooming on in, and you can just see how deteriorated that Central Mall has become. And I remember at the very end of the movie Jason Bourne, where Jason Bourne is meeting this lady who's part of this intelligence community, and they're meeting at a park inside Washington, D.C., and the pavement is all cracked. There are sections of it missing. It's just, it's really a shame for the government to not even keep its own capital city in a state of good repair. I think tells you a lot about what's gone wrong with this country.
I don't like those old Western movies where the front is a facade and you go behind, it's just a 2x4 keeping up the front. Right?
Yeah, it is. It's very much like that, like a movie set, or like, or for that matter, a bank. That's one of the things when I was working on Lost, we used one of the finest banks in Honolulu as a location. And from the front, from where the customers are, it looks beautiful. And we were working around back, and it was like the wood was all rotted, and it was just a shambles. It was all facade.
Hey, Mike, that you mentioned that, was it the Marine guy is going to be the next chief of staff?
Yes.
Trump's going to pick for. Well, he's like, Russia's the next threat. Well, to the last Ukrainian, huh? How about to the last Georgian? Because they all ran for the hills, and they'll run for the hills in Ukraine too. I don't care if the Azov battalion is backing some of these guys or the right sector, because that's what they got in these units. They got thugs keeping these people from running but they'll still run, Mike, because they did in Georgia. Remember, the U.S. and Israel was advisors in Georgia, remember? And when the Russians came in, they went out because they didn't want to go head-to-head with a peer. That's it. They're not going to go head-to-head with a peer army, because they'll know they get whooped. Well, Ukraine is dealing with a massive defection problem. A lot of their regular military have deserted and even left the country. And so they're looking at going up against the forces in Donbass, who may have inferior weaponry, but they're fighting for their homes. They're fighting for things they can see with their own eyes. It's not some abstract principle or promise of democracy or a paycheck or a nice box of chocolates from President Poroshenko. I think they're going to be very determined and dedicated fighters. Or a box of cookies from Victoria Nuland. Yes. Hey, Mike, I don't know if I keep forgetting to mention this story about, this shows you what the problem is. DC Comics, Superman? Yes. About, he meeting a refugee from Syria, and his sister was asked by Assad, backed by the Russians. That's in that comic book. Yeah. Now, I don't know if anybody knows that, but that's crazy, no? This is how the propaganda works. To be in a comic book like that, pushing this kind of garbage, not that but it's anybody backfiring. Buys comic books anymore. It's backfiring because, ever since they started making comics politically correct and propagandistic, sales have just fallen right off. It's become an issue. People don't want to be preached at anymore. They don't want to be preached about, obeisance to the war god. And then, Mike, I'm on the serious issue now about the chessboard of the world. The moves are getting less and less. I don't want to scare people but the moves are getting less and less, and there's only going to be a few moves left soon. That's how I look at it. I don't know if that's how you look at it. Yeah, I think if in fact Ukraine is going to attack Donbass on the 14th, we could be in a major war, including with Russia, by Christmas. And obviously that's an area of concern. That's one thing that, even like Trump, he said, this is another quote he said, I'm not going to let the enemy know my moves, but he lets everybody know his moves, though.
Yeah, it's all over Twitter. You know, it's all over Twitter.
It's the most bizarre thing, Mike. I mean, after that, they're making it out like when he was talking to Nancy Pelosi, like they had a shouting match. I don't really consider that a shouting match because that's how I normally talk in my house. You know, that's not a shouting match.
Well, I wouldn't want to live in your house.
Well, you know what I mean, though? You look at that and France and Theresa May, even though she survived, I mean, it's just the three countries that attacked Syria, right? United States, Britain, and France are the ones that are all messed up. And you know who's going to still be there? Putin.
And Assad.
If you look at what's going on, yep, that's how I look at it, Mike. But that's all I wanted to say, Mike. Have a good rest of the show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Okay, up in Canada, the Council of Canadians released results of a poll showing that 82% of Ontario residents are opposed to new or expanded permits for bottled water companies. And the strongest opposition came from those aged 18 to 34. And they were 91% opposed. Now, this commoditization of water has become yet another scam, where these water companies will come on in, they'll make a sweetheart deal with the government, and then they'll basically suck the water out of the ground for pennies per gallon, put it in a bottle, and sell it back to you for $2 a bottle. There are now places in the United States where you are not allowed to collect rainwater on your own property anymore. They want you dependent on the corporations for everything. Next, it'll be air. Don't pay your air bill, they come over to your house and strangle you. It's actually, to an extent, it's already that way in Japan. In some of the more heavily polluted areas, there are what are called these air booths, where you can step inside and put some money in there, and it will basically run a filter so that you get exposed to pollution-free air for an interval of time. And it's also, you can select the perfume, what you want to smell on it as well. So it's like the DuPont model again. Let's poison the world and then sell everybody the antidote here. Over at Yellowstone, there are a lot of people getting very concerned over the Steamboat Geyser. Now, this is the world's tallest geyser, and like 20 years ago, it was also the world's slowest. It would take months between eruptions. Now, though, it's erupting quite rapidly, and it's been erupting every 7 to 10 days for the past 6 weeks. The activity's basically gone off the charts, and the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory geologists are saying this is unprecedented. It's unprecedented rates of eruption here. And the concern, of course, is that this is an indicator that something is moving deep underground with Yellowstone. And as you all know, there's a massive supervolcano down there, which is not extinct, it is dormant, and that's not the same thing. And of course, it will erupt eventually. It's erupted 5 or 6 times in the past, in the geologic past, and it's going to happen again. We don't know when. That's why they're getting very nervous about the Steamboat Geyser and some other things they've seen around Yellowstone. Like Yellowstone Lake has actually tilted a little tiny bit. Because when that supervolcano lets go, it will wreck most of the United States of America and a significant part of Canada as well. And nobody knows what to expect because nobody has scientifically investigated a supervolcano eruption. I think the last one that happened was something like 65,000 years ago over at Toba. So nobody knows what they look like. Nobody knows what precursors there are. Nobody knows what indicators to look for. Everybody's guessing. And guessing makes scientists very, very nervous. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials here. We'll be back with the last program segment of the day after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today. And I'm sorry to report that the confirmation has now come on in, courtesy of the Salt Lake Tribune. U.S. Attorney for Utah John Huber will not be testifying tomorrow before the House Oversight Subcommittee, as previously announced. And Representative Mark Meadows was hoping Huber would provide an update on his probe, but Huber's just going to sit back and run out the clock and wait until the Democrats have control of the House, at which point this investigation will go away. So apparently, instead of Huber, the hearing will feature Tom Fitton, the head of Judicial Watch, and 2 other tax professionals. And the purpose of the hearing is to discuss the management of 501c3 nonprofit organizations and how the designation impacts the programs and activities a nonprofit is allowed to conduct. Sounds very vanilla. The heading of the hearing is titled Oversight of Nonprofit Organizations, a Case Study on the Clinton Foundation. So, yeah, there really is a deep state. They are absolutely terrified that people are going to find out what that Clinton Foundation was really up to, what Hillary Clinton was really up to with that email server. It's just corrupt as all get out here. Alrighty, over in Malibu, California, having dealt with that horrendous fire, now they're dealing with massive mudslides that have shut down a lot of roads, including a section of Pacific Coast Highway. Apparently, they had a major fall storm that dumped snow and rain and loosened the hillsides in the burn areas. So they got kind of buried under that one. Remember that CRISPR baby scandal? The gene-edited twins? The key scientist has not been seen. It's thought he's under house arrest, and now they're backing off and saying that the embryos were not actually carried to term. So the story now is there are no GMO babies out there, that they were simply experimented on here. In other news, down in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the world is now facing the second deadliest Ebola outbreak in human history. And the worst part of it is it is now spread to a major city. Butembo, which is home to almost 1 million people. It's also a key trading and transport hub with links to other major cities in the country as well as neighboring countries, Uganda. So the health ministry is saying that the high density and mobility of Butembo's population presents new challenges to containment efforts, already complicated by sporadic rebel attacks on remote villages. That's a bad recipe. Bad recipe there. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everyone that you know. Start talking with your friends and neighbors, building up an interpersonal network that is not dependent on the internet. The time to start to get ready for major disruptions is now. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.